Before there were cities, before there were temples, before human beings had put a single name to the sky above them, there was the wilderness, and this wilderness was never thought to be empty. Something of immense sovereign power moved through it, something that the oldest traditions describe not as a force of nature, but as a being of celestial authority who governed nature, the way a lion governs the land it walks through. The legends of Jewish mystics, Christian scholars, and medieval ceremonial traditions all pointed to the same being, one whose name meant the Lion of God. That name was Ariel. Today we are looking into the story of Archangel Ariel, the angel of nature. If you are new to this channel and you enjoy exploring the myths, legends, and sacred histories of celestial beings, please consider subscribing and following. It is the most meaningful way to support this work and to ensure you never miss an episode as we continue this series together. Now let us begin. In ancient Hebrew, the name Ariel carried two meanings that shaped every tradition that followed. The first and most enduring translation was Lion of God. It came from the combination of two Hebrew roots, Ari, meaning lion, and El, meaning God. The same divine suffix found in the names of the archangels like Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael. In the ancient world, the lion was not merely a dangerous animal. It was a symbol of sovereignty, of fearless authority, and of the sacred power that guarded holy thresholds. To carry the name Lion of God was to carry a mantle of divine protection over the entire order of nature. The second meaning, debated by ancient scholars and rabbinical commentators alike, was altar of God, drawn from the Hebrew word Ariel, as it appeared in certain sacrificial contexts, referring specifically to the great altar of burnt offerings in the Temple of Jerusalem. This meaning tied the name not only to wild, untamed power, but to sacred, consecrated purpose, the place where the earthly met the divine. Both meanings would prove essential to understanding who Ariel was in the traditions that followed. Was Ariel understood as male or female? The answer was that different traditions gave different answers, and the name itself was partly responsible for the ambiguity. In classical Hebrew, the word Ari was grammatically masculine, meaning lion. But the name Ariel, taken as a whole, carried no fixed grammatical gender in the way that Hebrew nouns and names often did. It functioned more as a title, Lion of God, than as a gendered proper name. This left open the question of whether the being who bore that name was more properly understood as the lion or the lioness. In the official theological positions of both Judaism and Christianity, angels were understood as beings that entirely transcended human gender categories. The dominant view in Rabbinic Judaism, laid out across centuries of commentary, was that angels possessed no physical body in the human sense, and therefore no biological sex. In traditions that emphasized Ariel's strength, sovereign power, and martial authority, the Ariel who commanded wind and earth and administered divine justice, the imagery was often coded as masculine in the cultural language of the ancient Near East, where the lion was a symbol of kingship and masculine authority. In traditions that emphasized Ariel's role as a nurturer of the natural world, the guardian who walked through forests, protected wild creatures, and tended the abundance of the earth, the qualities attributed to Ariel carried associations that many ancient cultures coded as feminine. The earth itself, in ancient Near Eastern tradition, was frequently understood as feminine in nature, as a mother who brought forth life. The word Ariel first appeared in the Hebrew Bible not as the name of an angel, but as a poetic name for the city of Jerusalem. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 29, verses 1 and 2, the prophet Isaiah declared, "Woe to Ariel, the city where David dwelt. Add year to year, let them kill sacrifices. Yet I will distress Ariel, and there shall be heaviness and sorrow, and it shall be unto me as Ariel." Some ancient rabbinical scholars understood Ariel here as a reference to the fire that blazed perpetually upon the altar, a divine fire that consumed sacrifice and rose toward heaven. Others interpreted it as a description of the city's ferocious lion-like quality, the city that, like a lion, would both suffer and ultimately prevail. Later theological tradition, drawing on this passage, began to see in the name Ariel a celestial being, whose nature reflected these very qualities: sacred fire, sovereign strength, and a fierce, enduring connection to the sacred earth below. Perhaps the most theologically elaborate treatment of Ariel in ancient literature came not from the Jewish tradition, but from the Gnostic tradition, specifically from the Pistis Sophia, a Coptic Gnostic text compiled most likely in the 3rd or 4th century of the Common Era and preserved in what is known as the Askew Codex, one of the most important surviving Gnostic manuscripts. The Pistis Sophia, whose title translated as Faith Wisdom, was an extraordinary document. It described a series of teachings given by Jesus to his disciples after the resurrection, spanning 12 years of post-resurrection instruction. Within this elaborate cosmological framework, the universe was understood as a system of realms, each governed by powerful archons, cosmic rulers who administered portions of the created order. In this text, Ariel was described as a significant archon, a governing spiritual power who presided over one of the regions that souls pass through after death. The Pistis Sophia specifically associated Ariel with the administration of punishment and justice in the material realm, placing Ariel in a role analogous to a divine judge of the earthly domain. This was a striking portrayal. Far from the gentle nature keeper of popular imagination, the Ariel of the Pistis Sophia was a figure of authority and solemn power, one who enforced the divine order with the full weight of celestial authority. The Gnostic tradition also placed Ariel within a broader cosmological map, in which the natural world itself was a contested space, beautiful and ordered on the surface, but shot through with the tension between the material and the divine. In this context, Ariel's role as a governing power within the natural realm took on a deeper theological significance. Ariel was not simply a caretaker of trees and rivers, but a being who stood at the very boundary between the divine impulse of creation and the weight of the material world. Within the tradition of Jewish mysticism, and particularly within the elaborate spiritual framework of Kabbalah, Ariel occupied a meaningful place among the celestial hierarchy. The Zohar, the foundational work of Cabalistic literature, described the celestial realm as an intricate structure of divine light, angelic beings, and spiritual forces that mirrored and sustained the physical world below. Within this framework, angelic beings were understood as the channels through which divine energy flowed into the created world. Each angel governed a specific aspect of creation, and in the Cabalistic tradition, preserved through generations of mystical commentary, Ariel was associated with the earth and its natural manifestations, understood as the angelic presence through whom the divine vitality of the created world was expressed and maintained. The Sefer Raziel HaMalach, also known as the Book of Raziel the Angel, also preserved knowledge of powerful angelic beings associated with the natural elements. In the tradition flowing through these texts, Ariel was counted among the angelic princes who stood in the courts of heaven and administered the affairs of the natural world below. The Haikalot texts themselves presented a vision of heaven as a series of magnificent palaces, 7 great halls of light through which the mystic visionary passed, each governed by angelic gatekeepers of overwhelming radiance and power. In some of these texts, Ariel was identified among the great angelic princes who stood at the boundaries of the heavenly realm, beings of such immense radiance that their appearance was compared to lightning, their voices to the sound of many waters. Of all the questions that the ancient and medieval traditions surrounding Ariel attempted to answer, none was more carefully and consistently addressed than the question of how Ariel actually appeared, what form the angel of nature took. The most specific and consistently attested physical feature of Ariel across the ancient and medieval sources was the face. The scholar Gustav Davidson, in his landmark reference work, A Dictionary of Angels, recorded that Ariel was described in various texts as an angel who appeared, sometimes with the face of a lion. This was not simply a poetic metaphor. In the angelological tradition, the physical features attributed to angelic beings were understood as genuine expressions of their celestial nature. The tradition of angelic beings bearing the faces of living creatures was firmly established in the Hebrew scriptural and prophetic tradition. The four living creatures described in the book of Ezekiel, the cherubim who surrounded the divine throne, each bore four faces: the face of a man, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. The lion face was one of the four sacred faces of the divine throne guardians, associated in ancient Near Eastern thought with sovereignty, courage, and the South. In the parallel vision of the Book of Revelation, the four living creatures around the throne were described in similar terms, the second living creature having the face of a lion. This raised a question that students of angelology naturally asked. Was Ariel, the Lion of God, the same being as the lion-faced cherub who stood at the very throne of God in Ezekiel and Revelation? The ancient texts themselves did not make this identification directly. The lion-faced living creature of Ezekiel and Revelation belonged to the order of cherubim, a distinct and exalted class of angelic beings, identified by name in Ezekiel as the throne-bearers of God. The cherubim were beings of the innermost divine court. Their lion face understood in the ancient Near Eastern tradition as representing sovereignty over all. Ariel, by contrast, appeared in the angelological and mystical literature as a governing angelic prince of a different category. Not a cherub of the innermost throne, but a celestial ruler whose authority extended across the natural world below. However, the traditions were not silent about the connection. What the traditions suggested, taken together, was not that Ariel and the lion-faced cherub were the same being, but that they drew from the same deep symbolic reservoir, that the lion face of the divine throne and the lion name of the angel of nature were two expressions of the same sacred reality, that the wild, untamed power of the created natural world, in its most concentrated and sovereign form, was understood as the face through which the divine looked most directly and most ferociously upon the earth. Beyond the face, the broader bodily form attributed to Ariel drew from the detailed descriptions preserved in the Hakalot literature, the ancient Jewish mystical texts that described the celestial palaces and the angelic beings who inhabited them. The great angelic princes of the Hakalot tradition, the category of celestial being among whom Ariel was counted, were described in these texts with extraordinary, near overwhelming physical language. Their bodies were described as composed not of flesh and bone, but of concentrated divine light, a radiance that blazed with the intensity of fire and lightning simultaneously. The Hakalot Rabbati, one of the primary texts of this mystical tradition, compiled from sources extending back to the early centuries of the Common Era, described the appearance of the great angelic princes in terms that made their physical form effectively indistinguishable from pure, burning light. Their faces shone with a brightness that exceeded the sun at its midday zenith. Ariel's position in the celestial hierarchy placed Ariel most consistently in the rank of angelic prince, a being of governing authority over a specific domain of creation, exercising a level of power and celestial stature above the ordinary messenger angel, but below the seraphim and cherubim of the innermost divine court. Within this framework, the tradition most consistently associated with angelic princes of governing rank, including the great princes of the Hakalot tradition among whom Ariel was counted, described them as bearing two great wings of immense span, consistent with the images of governing and traveling angelic beings found across the Hebrew prophetic tradition. The Hakalot texts describe these wings as stretching across the heavens, not a description of folded modest wings, but of wings extended to their full cosmic span, capable of covering the width of the created world. However, it was important to note what the ancient texts were careful to preserve, that the number of wings attributed to any specific angelic being depended significantly on the rank and tradition in question, and that Ariel's exact wing count was not specified with absolute precision in every source. What the traditions consistently communicated was the scale and power of those wings, wings that, when spread, were understood as filling the sky, carrying the authority of the Lion of God across the full expanse of the natural world that Ariel was appointed to govern. The question of how to recognize an angelic presence was one that the mystical traditions took seriously and described with considerable consistency. For Ariel specifically, the traditions offered several distinct accounts of how the angel's proximity was understood to manifest. The oldest and most consistent description of how Ariel's presence was recognized came from the natural world itself. In the tradition preserved through the Haikalot literature and the Cabalistic sources, Ariel's presence was understood to make itself known through specific disturbances and intensifications of natural phenomena. A sudden change in the quality of wind, particularly a wind that arose without apparent meteorological cause, that seemed to move against the prevailing weather, or that carried an unusual clarity and freshness, was understood in these traditions as a potential sign of angelic presence within the natural realm. The behavior of wild animals was also understood as a potential indicator of angelic proximity. Since Ariel's domain included sovereign authority over the wild creatures of the earth, the ancient and medieval tradition held that animals responded to Ariel's presence in ways that were perceptible to careful observers. An unusual stillness among animals in a wild place, or conversely, an unusual alertness and orientation in a particular direction, was sometimes understood in this framework as a response to a presence beyond ordinary human perception. In the Cabalistic tradition, where Ariel's domain was understood as the administration of divine vitality through the physical world, the presence of Ariel was sometimes described in terms of an intensification of the natural world's perceptible qualities. A moment in which the colors of a landscape seemed more vivid than ordinary perception warranted, in which the scent of earth and growing things seemed more present and immediate than the circumstances explained, or in which the sounds of the natural world, wind, water, the calls of birds, seemed to carry an unusual depth and resonance. This was not understood as a supernatural vision in the dramatic sense, but as a moment in which the veil between the ordinary and the sacred became briefly and unusually thin. A moment in which the divine vitality that Ariel was understood to administer through the natural world became perceptible to the ordinary senses in an extraordinary degree. Drawing on the deep identification between Ariel and the lion, certain traditions held that the appearance of a lion, or the unexpected sense of a lion's presence, even in places where no physical lion existed, carried a specific significance in relation to Ariel. In the ancient Near Eastern tradition, the lion at the threshold was a herald of sacred presence. The unexpected encounter with a lion, or with what was understood as a lion's quality of watchful, sovereign stillness in the natural world, was sometimes read in this tradition as a sign that the Lion of God had drawn near. In the Haikalot literature, the great angelic princes were described as surrounded by radiance of such intensity that their appearance was indistinguishable from fire and lightning. Consistent with this tradition, unexpected experiences of unusual light in natural settings, a light that seemed to exceed what the sun and sky could account for, or a quality of illumination in a wild place that struck observers as fundamentally different from ordinary daylight, were sometimes understood in the mystical tradition as a sign of powerful angelic presence. The powers attributed to Ariel across these traditions formed a rich and comprehensive picture of celestial authority over the natural world. At the center of Ariel's attributed powers was authority over the elements of the natural world. In the tradition preserved in texts from the Testament of Solomon through the medieval angelological writings, Ariel was understood to govern the behavior of wind and weather, to influence the growth and abundance of the natural world, and to command the wild creatures of the earth and sky. Ariel was also credited in various traditions with the power to reveal hidden knowledge of the natural world, specifically the secret properties of herbs, stones, minerals, and natural substances. This was a power of profound practical significance in the ancient and medieval world, where knowledge of natural remedies and the properties of natural materials was considered a form of sacred wisdom. In several medieval angelological traditions, Ariel was specifically identified as one of the angelic rulers of the air, a being who governed the movement of wind across the earth. The Liber Juratus Honorii, a medieval grimoire, listed Ariel among the spiritual rulers associated with the elemental forces of air and earth, consistent with the role described in far earlier traditions. This connection to air and wind also carried a deeper theological significance. In Hebrew, the word for wind, breath, and spirit was the same word. The air that Ariel governed was not merely meteorological. It was the breath of divine life itself, the animating force that sustained all living creatures. One of the most enduring powers attributed to Ariel was the role of protector of wild animals and the untamed natural places of the earth that lay beyond the boundaries of human settlement. This was understood not as a pastoral or sentimental role, but as a profound cosmic responsibility. In the theological worldview of these ancient traditions, the natural world was not simply background scenery for human history. It was a sacred domain, created and sustained by divine intention, and Ariel was the angelic being through whom the divine care for this domain was expressed and enforced. From the earliest texts, including the references in 4th Ezra, and the elaborate descriptions in the Pistis Sophia, Ariel was consistently associated with the administration of divine justice, particularly as it related to the natural and material order. This was not a power of punishment for its own sake, but of restoration, the correction of imbalances in the natural and spiritual order so that the divine intention embedded in creation could be fulfilled. Over the centuries, the traditions surrounding Ariel crystallized into several distinct legends, stories that captured the essence of Ariel's nature and powers in vivid, memorable form. In the mystical tradition flowing from Cabalistic sources, a legend described Ariel as the angelic guardian who walked within the natural world itself, not as a distant celestial overseer peering down from a remote heaven, but as an active, present power moving through the forests, rivers, and mountains of the earth. In this legend, Ariel took on the form of the lion to traverse the created world. The legend held that when the natural world fell into disruption, when floods overran their bounds, when wildfires consumed what was sacred, it was Ariel who moved first to restore the order, commanding the winds to settle, the waters to recede, and the earth to return to its proper form. Drawing directly from the passage in Isaiah 29, a second legend understood Ariel as the angelic spirit of Jerusalem herself, not merely a name for the city, but an actual celestial being whose presence animated and sustained the holy city's sacred character. In this legend, Ariel's power rose and fell in direct correspondence with the spiritual state of the people who inhabited Jerusalem. When the people lived in righteousness and faithfulness, Ariel's presence was described as a consuming fire of divine light over the city, a light so intense that no darkness could approach. But when the city fell into moral and spiritual darkness, the legend described a terrible reversal. Ariel's fire turned inward. The same divine fire that had been a source of protection became, as the prophet Isaiah declared, a fire of divine chastisement. The city that had been surrounded by Ariel's protective light found itself surrounded instead by distress and heaviness. Not because Ariel had abandoned Jerusalem, but because Ariel's nature as a force of divine justice demanded that the imbalance be corrected. This legend portrayed Ariel not as a partisan guardian who defended its charge unconditionally, but as a being whose fundamental nature was aligned with divine truth, and who would enforce that truth even when it was painful to the very people under Ariel's protection. In certain strands of medieval Jewish legend, Ariel was associated with the abundance and generosity of the earth, the divine intention, embedded in creation, that the earth should provide for the creatures that lived upon it. This legend did not describe Ariel simply as an agricultural deity or a spirit of harvest. It was more fundamental than that. The legend held that the earth's basic generosity, its capacity to sustain life, to yield food, to provide shelter and material, was administered through Ariel's celestial oversight. Where that generosity flowed freely, Ariel's presence was at work. Where it was disrupted, by drought, by desolation, by the moral failures that in the ancient worldview were understood to affect the physical world, Ariel was engaged in the work of restoration. This was a profound extension of Ariel's role as guardian of nature. not merely a protector of wild places, but a guardian of the fundamental life-sustaining capacity of the earth itself. A further legend, preserved in traditions connected to the Sefer Raziel HaMalach and related mystical literature, described Ariel as a revealer of the hidden wisdom embedded in the natural world. In this legend, Ariel was understood the knowledge of the secret properties of natural things, the medicinal virtues of plants, the hidden powers of stones, the elemental forces resident in the natural substances of the earth. This knowledge was understood as a form of divine wisdom, a language through which the Creator had encoded meaning and purpose into every element of the created world. The legend held that this knowledge had been entrusted to Ariel at the moment of creation, that when the natural world came into being, Ariel was given the understanding of every created thing's nature and purpose. And in specific, rare circumstances, under divine sanction, this knowledge could be revealed to human beings who sought it for righteous purposes. This legend positioned Ariel as a kind of celestial librarian of natural wisdom, the keeper of the most ancient and comprehensive knowledge of the created world. The traditions that described Ariel came from vastly different communities, different centuries, different languages, and different theological frameworks. And yet they agreed on the essentials: tremendous power, sovereign authority over natural forces, fierce protective strength, ancient wisdom, and a nature that was both consuming and life-giving. The Lion of God roamed not in human temples or human courts, but in the untamed places where human authority ended and the vast, sovereign, divinely ordered natural world began. Thank you so much for walking through this story with us today. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might appreciate it. We will be back soon with another episode in this series, exploring the legends of another remarkable figure from the traditions of angelology and sacred history. Until then, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.